Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're doing a top 10. Topic of the top 10? Top 10 masks. And before we get into this isn't necessarily a ranking of the wrestlers themselves, just basically the masks that they wore, or in some cases still wear. Being that we're just about 2 weeks away from Halloween, I thought this was a good idea for a video kind of themed with the season. I will say I did make one caveat, because at some point I planned to make another top 10, and that is I did not include any Chikara wrestlers. I do plan to make a Chikara top 10 at some point, which will cover all of those guys and their amazing masks that they wore there. With that being said, let's jump right into the top 10. Number 10, Rey Mysterio, aka Rey Mysterio Jr. Over the years, he's had several different iterations of basically the same style, with the phoenixes on the side of the mask, the crown in the middle, or a cross in the middle depending on which version he's wearing. And they've all been really cool and really interesting. He's one of those wrestlers, he's probably the greatest lucha libre star of all time, at least in America. And he has a style and influence that's pretty much influenced almost every wrestler wrestling nowadays. And whether he's copying a comic book hero like The Flash or Batman, or just has something themed after the town they're in, or just a cool color scheme. His masks are always eye-popping, always gather your attention. There's a reason why he sells so many of the masks as merchandise. Yeah, it's mostly because he's one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, but the fact of the look, that really helps to sell as well. Now going from that on number 9, L.A. Park, aka La Parka, and this one's kind of convoluted because there's a couple different guys that have wrestled as La Parka, so much so that there's a La Parka and LA Park. It's always been to me one of those cool masks that never really changed much. He kind of looked like Skeletor a bit if you harken back to the WCW days, and then in later years he would add kind of a Darth Maul design to the mask itself. And I may be conflating both LA Park and La Parka here, which is why it gets a little bit confusing, especially since I don't necessarily religiously follow Lucha Libre. I like to catch the big shows like Triple Mania, or if CMLL is putting on a big show, I'll watch that. I think their big show is called Anniversario or something to that effect. But I don't know the whole lore and the whole deal with that, so I might be conflating two wrestlers under the same idea. But either way, it's just a really cool looking mask. For a guy who at one point was the chairman of WCW, I thought it was really cool. Really added to his gimmick in my opinion. Now going from that, our number 8, Tiger Mask. Much like I said with La Parka, there have been several people that have donned the Tiger Mask persona, and it's pretty much stayed the same throughout all of the iterations. There are little variations, like Tiger Masks will wear the number that they are on there, on the middle of it, like the current Tiger Mask in New Japan has Tiger Mask 4 or just the number 4 in Roman numerals. I always kind of thought this was really cool, even going back to when I first started seeing Tiger Mask in magazines in the 80s. I thought it was a neat look. It kind of had that anime look, which obviously it's influenced by the anime itself. It kind of really looked different. I like the entire thought of it. It's more of an evolution of masks that came before it, whereas before that masks were pretty straightforward. This added a little bit of a flair that we started seeing more and more come through the 80s and 90s, where it didn't just have to be a massive figurehead. You could have horns or ears or things sticking out the side of the mask. I always loved this design. I like the idea of the mask itself. It's just simple. It's easy. You easily understand who it is and what he represents. It's a fantastic mask in my opinion. Now going from that, our number 7, Big Van Vader. Now I see a lot of videos about wrestling masks, and they leave out masks like Vader's because he doesn't necessarily fit within the traditional style of a masked wrestler, which he did at one point. He had a black mask with like lightning bolts or red lightning bolts on it. But the one I specifically think is just an amazing mask is it's kind of more or less just straps going across his face, red straps. And I think he even had a black variant at times. But it was just so cool and so different. It added to the look of Vader, the menacing aspect of him. Much like Darth Vader in the Star Wars universe, Big Van Vader, his look added as much to the character as the character itself. You were automatically intimidated just by looking at him, whether it be the elephant headgear he would wear coming to the ring, or the mask, or the MMA inspired gloves. He just looked like a beast, like a mastodon. So impressive and so great. I enjoyed this. That's why it makes my list. I'll go from that on number 6, the Great Muda. And I know most of you may be saying to me, George, most of Muda's career he only wore face paint, which is partially true. After a certain time, and I believe it's the early 2000s, Muda went from wearing the face paint to where he had a mask design that he would wear, which you can kind of see here if you're not familiar with that. And to me, it was just cool. Everything about the presentation of the Great Muda or Kenji Muto was awesome. Either way, whether he was playing himself or the Great Muda character. I've talked at length on how much I enjoy the Great Muda and how he was the guy that really got me into Japanese wrestling and how I love that character so much. And this mask just added to that. It kind of at times looked like anything from crab tentacles to something you would see H.R. Geiger make, and it really added to the mystique of the character, the Great Muda. I think it's so iconic. It's such a great look on one of the most iconic wrestlers in my opinion. I think it's just an awesome looking mask. Now going from that on number 5, Mankind. I go back and forth a lot on this mask because there's a 1996 version of George that hated the fact that they put a mask on Cactus Jack. Because Cactus Jack, to me, at the time, and still is, one of my favorite characters and my favorite wrestler of all time. I really thought that WWE was going to ruin him. And I've grown to like it after, but at the time I really hated the brown gear and how they treated him a bit. And that's not to say that WWE was treating him wrong. It would be kind of akin to, you have a favorite actor in a TV show, like let's say Bryan Cranston in Malcolm in the Middle, and then he starts a new show like Breaking Bad, and he's a totally different character. It takes you a bit to warm up to it. Once I warmed up to this, the mask itself is just great. It's kind of a homage to Hannibal Lecter with a little bit of some S&M vibe to it. It really has a distinctive and unique look to it. And I think once he morphed out of the strictly brown gear and started wearing more of the button-up shirts and tried to be the corporate Mankind, it worked a lot better. It didn't feel as cartoony. And I absolutely loved it. One of my absolute favorite wrestler of all time. I thought this was an iconic look. I still do. I still check every now and again to see if I could find a decent looking replica, and there's some okay ones out there, but there's nothing I think really looks like the mask. They either come off looking too fake plastic leather or cheap, and they just don't feel the way the mask should feel, in my opinion. I feel like it should feel like an old baseball glove is what it looks like when he's wearing it. Just an iconic look on one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. Speaking of greats, our number 4, the Ultimo Dragon. Ultimo is another one of those guys that really innovated the cruiserweight division and really infused the Japanese and Mexican style and put them together and made a whole new style of wrestling of his own. And he had a mystique and an aura, and everything about him just was awesome. I mean, from his matches to his championship runs to his iconic mask, which had the dragon tail coming down. It had, basically, in combination with the shoulder pads he wore, it made a new look that nobody else looked like at the time. And some have copied it since, and some have done their version of it since then, but I don't think anyone ever quite got the effect that the Ultimo Dragon did with his look. He really made this his own thing and made a great looking presentation to go on with one of the great wrestlers of his generation. I mean, he's so iconic and such a great wrestler. I can't think of anybody that's around my age that watched the Ultimo Dragon that thinks poorly of him. He's just a great wrestler. The mask is iconic. That's why it's on my list. I'll go from that on number 3, a contemporary of Ultimo Dragon, Psychosis. And it might be easy to forget because for so long now Psychosis has wrestled without a mask, but his mask, with the horns coming out the side, the black and white look to it, the tie-in to his wrestling gear, he looked like a superhero. The long curly dark hair coming out of it. When I seen Psychosis and Rey Mysterio debut in ECW, which was revolutionary, revolutionary, I instantly saw two new wrestling stars. And while Psychosis didn't quite get the same recognition of Mysterio or even Ultimo Dragon, I think he's one of those guys that's heavily underrated and kind of forgotten with time. To me and to a lot of people that watched back in the day, one of the big selling points of watching WCW was the Cruiserweight division, was guys like Mysterio and Psychosis and Juventud Guerrera and Dean Malenko, and they were all doing such revolutionary and interesting things. And like I said, with Tiger Mask, he had something that you really didn't see that often before, with the horns coming out of the side of it. It added a whole new thing. He looked like he was a bull, basically, like a superhero bull. Again, an underrated wrestler, a great looking mask. That's why he's so high on my list. I'll go from that on number 2. It's gotta be, it's Kane. And I know that was a very terrible Vince McMahon impression, and I probably even botched the words up a little bit. But the original Kane mask, the later one was cool too, the pretty much red one, but the red mask with the black triangles coming across it and the very small mouth slit, it looked like something you would see in a horror movie. It looked like something Jason or Michael Myers may have picked up and wore. I've said this before, and I've said this a million times in conversations. The character of Kane probably should have been just a 6-month character. However, the talent of Glenn Jacobs made that a 20-year Hall of Fame character. In that original presentation with the mask, with Paul Bearer, the gear, again, the gear goes into it. It ties into everything. The size, the style of matches he was having. He just looked amazing. I really love this mask. At one point I had the plastic one that you would buy at live shows, and it got destroyed somehow. Something fell on it. It was very flimsy. A good friend of mine, when we went to Raw back in probably 98, knew how much I enjoyed the Kane character, and while we were there, he actually bought it for me. Shout out to you, Joey, if you're watching this. And I just loved it. I still have the newer version somewhere in my bedroom. I have no idea where, because I have so much crap I really need to go through, that they would sell at Walmart a few years ago, which is cool. Again, not a bad mask, but to me, the iconic Kane look is the red mask with the black triangles coming across it. Now, before I get to number 1, I do a thing here on my top 10s called the best of the rest. Basically, this was things that were thought of for the list but didn't quite make it. First up, Mil Mascaras. Now, if you talk to fans of Lucha Libre, there are a few names that come up. El Santo, Blue Demon, Mil Mascaras, Conan, Rey Mysterio. These are the guys that are looked at like American wrestling fans look at Hulk Hogan, Steve Austin, Ric Flair. Mil Mascaras, to me, really stood out because, much like Mysterio, he had one template, basically, that he would change with designs on the mask. He would have the M in the middle and the kind of a sunburst look to it, and it would go on anything from a cheetah print mask to a black mask to a purple mask to one of the million masks that he wore. He was such a great talent and such an iconic wrestler that the look of Mil Mascaras revolutionized and, I believe, inspired more people than almost anyone on this list. It's such a great look, such a fantastic icon of wrestling. It had to be considered. Unfortunately, it didn't quite make the list, but I did consider. Now, last but not least on the best of the rest, Pentagon Jr., aka Penta L0M. I really like this mask. I like the fact that it ties in the mask plus face paint behind the mask, and it's an evolution of his father, Pentagon Sr.'s mask. And much like I said, a few of these, he has some different iterations of it. Obviously, the most popular one is the black and white version. There's a gold one he wears. There's a Joker version that kind of looks like the Heath Ledger Joker, and different color schemes that go with it. To me, and I really think Penta is one of the best wrestlers in the world. He's one of the most compelling characters, especially during his Lucha Underground run. To me, I thought he was a real star, one of the best wrestlers on that show. And he is just so compelling. He doesn't even have to talk. I don't even have to understand his language, which I don't. I don't speak Spanish, but I understand him, and I understand his motivations. Just a great wrestler with a great iconic look. Really one of the best in my opinion. Unfortunately, didn't quite make the list. Now, before I get to my number 1, let's smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. If you see where it says join, That's how you can become a channel member. Becoming a channel member really would help me out. If you disagree, you think I put a mask too high, mask too low, left a mask off the list altogether, let me know down in the comments. With that being said, my number one mask in the history of wrestling, Jushin Thunder Liger. Much like I said with Tiger Mask, this was based off an anime look, and it's so cool. And you may see that there's a theme here that I like masks that are different, like Psychosis, like Ultimo Dragon, Mankind. They all have a different variation on just the standard mask with a design on it. Liger has horns coming out the sides and out the top. And to me, he always kind of looked like an Ultraman villain. I never really seen the Liger anime, which I'm not big into anime. I've seen a few. I know, surprising. And it's just not for me, which is okay. If you love anime, I'm happy for you. I just haven't found many that I've really enjoyed personally. So I don't know the whole lore of it. But I do know stuff like Ultraman. And watching Ultraman, he kind of feels like an evil version of Ultraman with the gimmick. And I may be way off the base, and there may be people that are screaming at me in the comments going, this is more of his anime based off of this. And I understand where you're coming from. I'm the same way when someone says something about something that I'm an expert on. I am fully admitting I'm not an anime expert, so I don't know the references. But there are some, like I said, like Ultraman that I've watched that he reminded me of. Or even further back, he kind of reminded me of something you would see on Astro Boy. Or kind of even further into the future with Voltron. And I know a lot of people think of Voltron just the lions, but they had a couple different versions. There was a car version, which I actually had the toy for, because I really thought the whole series itself was cool when I was a kid. And he kind of reminds me of something that would be a villain on there. And that's not even talking about the immense talent and the absolute first ballot Hall of Fame, one of the most revolutionary wrestlers of all time. His look itself is revolutionary. That's not including what he could do in the ring, which almost every wrestler alive today can say they drew some kind of inspiration from Jushin Liger. Again, just one of my favorite looks in the history of wrestling. I think it looks so cool. The whole presentation of him, just amazing in my opinion. With that being said, again, if you think I left something off the list, put someone too high, someone too low, let me know down here in the comments. While you're there, let me know what your favorite mask design is. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to be the best wrestler with the best design. If you think the Golga mask was your favorite, let me know that. If you like the Patriot, that's a great mask that didn't make this list. If you're a fan of somebody current like Commander or Psycho Clown, those are great masks and they didn't make this list. Let me know down here what your favorite mask is. I'd love to hear your opinion. With that all being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another Top 10.